All right, so my name is Rene, and with no further ado, I'll do the intro again. I'm the editor-in-chief of iMore, where we write about everything Apple, iOS, OS 10. I host a bunch of podcasts, mostly Apple-related, some general technology, some mobile stuff in there. I find Apple a fascinating company. I like the way that they make their products. I believe that they are generally in line with my best interests, and I value the same sorts of things that they value, so it's always been a company that's fascinated me. And one of the things that's been fascinating me the most recently is this whole idea of contextual awareness. And what I mean by that is our devices, they're called smartphones. When they started, they were kind of really dumb. And step by step, year after year, Apple and other companies are injecting a sort of new kind of smarts into them. And I want to go back all the way to the original iPhone, because Steve Jobs, he made a very good case for sensors going all the way back to the original iPhone. It had a capacitive screen, a multi-touch screen, so it could sense the electricity in our fingers. You could tap a finger on the screen and it would detect that finger. You didn't have to squish two little layers of plastic together like you had to do back in the Trio days to make the system touch screens work. But it was also smart enough to sort of see a little bit beyond itself, and it could tell it doesn't use the fingers the way Nokia does or some other companies do to try to do glove recognition or something. But it can sort of see where the other fingers are, so it can tell not only that you're touching it, but which finger and how your hand is angled. And it makes a very intelligent multi-touch system. It had an eyesight camera on it, so the phone could actually see. It couldn't do much with the little bits of light that it could pull in, but it could make a picture out of them. It had 802.11g Wi-Fi, which meant that it could connect to networks. So it wasn't just a device in your hand, it could actually connect to the internet, and that would lead to a lot of really exciting things. It had edge networking, 2G networking, so even when you weren't on Wi-Fi, it could still very slowly pull down some data for you. It had Bluetooth 2.0, so it could connect to peripherals, like that tiny little Apple Bluetooth dongle they released the very first year and fell out of everybody's ears, and they discontinued almost immediately, but it could connect to that thing. It had an accelerometer, so that when you turned the screen horizontally, the device actually knew it. It recognized it, and it could turn the screen with you. So the device was aware of its orientation. It had a proximity sensor, so that multi-touch display would turn off when you brought it next to your face and you wouldn't accidentally hit it with your nose or your cheek or something. It had an ambient light sensor, so it could actually tell the kind of light that was in the room, and it could adjust the brightness of the screen. I don't know if anybody here watches Cosmos, the new version of the Cosmos series, but a couple weeks ago they had the episode about how eyes evolved in the sea and how creatures that can start to detect light from dark were the first stages in developing the eyes that we have now. And our phone back in 2007 could already start to distinguish light from darkness. And it also had a microphone. Obviously it's a phone, but it could record, it could take in the sounds that were being made around it. You flash forward a year, you get to the iPhone 3G, and now it's got 3G networking, which is quite a bit faster, but it's also got AGPS, assisted GPS. So it connects to the cell tower. The cell tower does a bunch of pre-crunching. It has GPS satellites in orbit, and it can tell not just the orientation of where the phone is, but it can tell actually where you are in the world. Not down to the millimeter maybe, but down to several feet. It has a really good idea that you're in your house, at the park, at Starbucks. So now the phone can be used for maps and a bunch of other really interesting things. Fast forward again, iPhone 3GS. You get Bluetooth 2.1. You get a magnometer, which is a fancy name for a digital compass. So now it not only knows where you are, but what direction you're facing. It's not very useful to say Starbucks is a mile away from you if you don't know which way you're going. You might go a mile in the wrong way. So now it can tell you which way you're facing and which way you need to go. And the camera started getting smarter. It started getting autofocus and auto white balance and auto exposure. So it not only pulled in all this light and started making images out of it, but it could sort of make decisions about that light. It could understand a little bit of what it was seeing. And we got the first version of voice control, which was a really funny-looking blue screen that didn't talk very well, but could do very basic things like call people and play music. And that meant that the microphone wasn't just there to record you anymore, but it could start to understand what you were saying and do very simple things based on that understanding. iPhone 4. It brought with it the FaceTime camera. Now there was not only a camera on the back, but a camera on the front. The Wi-Fi went to 802.11n, much faster, much further range. We got a gyroscope. So not only could it tell what orientation it was in, what direction it was in, but it can start to do 3 axes of rotation and to determine its own rotation around gravity. So it was becoming a more precise tool. It could understand its place in the universe a little bit better. And it also had a second mic, because it wasn't just a phone anymore. It was a video conferencing tool. It could take basic voice instructions, and it could also start canceling out. It could figure out what noise was important, what noise wasn't important, and sort of cancel out the stuff that it wasn't interested in. iPhone 4S. The camera can now do facial recognition. It can not only automatically focus, but it can tell when a person's face is there and figure out that's the important thing. That's what the human behind me wants. And it can pull that out and say, that's the part I'm going to focus in. It got Bluetooth 4.0, which is Bluetooth low energy, which is going to become much more important going forward. It got GLONASS, which is the Russian version of GPS. So it was much more useful to more people around the world, had more satellites to draw on. And it got Siri, which is a little Pixar character in your pocket. It took voice control, added a lot of personality to it, and it could actually do basic, simple functions for you. It wasn't an assistant like a human assistant who had a very wide range of context, but Siri could do sequential inference, which means that if you mentioned something at the beginning of a command and then you came back later to give additional commands, it still understood the context of those commands, understood the relationships. So if I was to say, what's on my appointment today, if I was to say, call my mom, if I was to do any of those things, it would understand I want today or I want my mom as the focal point of the next command. And that was a big improvement for voice control at that point. The iPhone 5 went to LTE networking. It got a 3rd mic, so it could start doing Phil Schiller's favorite thing in the world, beam forming. It could do an even better job of figuring out where you were and making sound good. And it got the Lightning connector. Because the old 30-pin dock connector, as many accessories as we had for it, as fond as we were of it, it had sort of run its course. It had a bunch of legacy pins that weren't even being used anymore. It had pins that had been repurposed, not once, but twice. It took a master's degree in engineering to even figure out which pins were what anymore. And then you got this very simple, very smart connector that could sort of rearrange itself for almost any task. So you no longer have to worry about having a different pin for FireWire, and a different pin for serial, a different pin for USB. You could just plug it in and let the pins worry about figuring out themselves, with a little bit of chip-side logic. iPhone 5S, multi-peer networking. So networking is great provided you can actually get to the network. But what multi-peer does is say, okay, I'm out on my farm, or I'm in an area, my router is down, or I'm inside a building and I don't have good connectivity, but my friend 20 feet away has Bluetooth, I can hop to there. And then he's within Wi-Fi range of someone else, I can go to them. And hey, they're on a router, I can get to the internet. Or if you've been watching a lot of the news lately and you want no part of a monitorable internet, you can actually make multi-hop connections without ever touching the public internet. So it becomes another way, a much more redundant way, a much more flexible way to get your iPhone online. Then we have Touch ID. So for years we had the home button. The home button is fantastic. It's an escape hatch for anyone who's a little bit intimidated by computing. They get confused, they press the home button, bingo, you're back in a known state. But it didn't do anything else. It was a dumb button. Now with Touch ID, it can actually tell who you are. It can scan your fingerprints, convert that into basic math, send that down a secure hardware channel, put that in the A7 processor, secure enclave, and then release a yes/no token. Yes, this person can unlock me. Yes, this person can buy stuff on an iTunes account. Or no, I don't know who you are, stay away. Okay. And that allowed it to actually begin to identify us. So we're not just a person holding it anymore. We're a specific person holding it. We got iBeacon, which used the Bluetooth 4.0 to sort of map out not only where we were in the greater world, where GPS was great, but sort of help us around inside where there was no GPS. It could move us, to the closest parking space, or to the right store, or it can start doing other things, like if I'm sight impaired, it can maybe help me through a national park. If I'm at a store and I don't have anyone around to help me, if there's no retail customer service person, it can maybe give me information about the products I'm looking at. Then we have the M7 coprocessor, which takes all of the different sort of motion-based sensors, the accelerometer, the gyroscope, the compass, the GPS. It takes all of those things and it just keeps track of them persistently. Because previous to that, you had to fire up the main processor in the iPhone in order for it to do any sort of recording of motion. And that was a big battery drain, so it didn't do it very often. It did it opportunistically. So you'd have huge gaps in its record. The M7 chip can just record that at a very low power level, very quietly, so that at all times the iPhone can have a rough idea of what is happening to it in the world. And then you have CarPlay. And you hear a lot about wearables. We hear a lot about glasses and watches and pins and all these things. But there's also projectables. There's things that aren't on us, but things that go out into the world. And AirPlay and CarPlay are projectables. They take all the stuff that's in our phone, the interface, the apps, and it puts them onto another display. And that's another way for the phone to become more than just what it is by itself. So we take all this stuff, and we put it all together, and what does it start to give us? Well, connected location is one thing. We had GPS in our cars for years, but it was a really sort of dumb GPS. It would sit there, it would drone at us, it would be slightly disapproving if we ever made a wrong move and had to course correct us. And also, if you wanted to update it, you had to go get an SD card and pay someone $200 and figure out how to put new maps on it. And that is now a relic of the past because we have GPS in our pocket that's always online, that's always up to date. And because it's doing that, it can also do navigation directions that aren't based on static maps, but based upon crowdsourcing. So I have an iPhone in my pocket, 1,000 other people have an iPhone in their pocket. You can start to put together a good map of how things are moving or not moving. And if you're willing to share that kind of data, you can start to get real-time traffic and other really interesting helpful benefits from this kind of technology. You can also do device tracking. If you lose your iPhone, if you misplace it, if it's stolen, if, like me, at least 3-4 times a week it's simply lost in the sofa cushions, you can press a button and it will make a sound and you can find it again. And that's because it kind of keeps track of where it is. And you can also do retail check-in. Before, if you went to an Apple store, you had to go up to the very nice smiling person with the iPad and tell them you were there and they check you in. Now, the GPS knows you're at the Apple store. It can automatically check you in. I mean, whether that's less human or more human, it's a convenience that you can choose to take to avail yourself of if you'd like to. Motion co-processing. So because you have access to all this data, you can use your iPhone as a game controller. You can take Real Racing 3 and throw it on your Apple TV and use your iPhone, something like a Wiimote. You can use it to turn the car, to use it like a magic wand to control something. All of that is now possible. But you can also use it as a fitness tracker. It can tell when you're taking steps. Previous to the M7, if you got the Fitbit app, then it thought it was okay, but then later, maybe pedometer came out. You thought this is a much better app. You would start from scratch. You'd essentially lose all of your data in one app. You'd start again with a new app. But now, because the M7 is keeping track of that, you have a week's worth of data all the time. So you launch a new fitness app, you've never used it before, it already has a week of your own personal data in it, which is kind of encouraging to me because I'm not starting at 0 every time. But it's also motivational because if I've seen that I've done this many steps, I'm more inclined to do it. It's not, 0 yesterday, I can go with 0 again today. I actually see, I walked 10,000 steps, I better do that again. It's also good for power saving because it knows when you're moving, it knows when you're stationary. If it's sitting on a desk, especially if it's nighttime and it has a high degree of certainty that you're sleeping, it can just power down the radios, it can do the network ping on a much slower basis. It can do everything it can to sort of maximize your power efficiency. It can also switch modes for navigation. If you're driving and you're going 60 miles an hour, it's pretty sure you're not walking, but then all of a sudden you stop and you start going much slower, it feels a bit of bouncing. Maybe now you are walking, and it can switch your navigation from driving to walking automatically. It's sensitive to modes. It can make those sort of modal switches. It can also do motion-based notification. I have an alarm set on the weekday morning because I have to wake up for work. On the weekends, I don't have to wake up for work. I would rather not have any notifications. I know I can send Do Not Disturb, but Do Not Disturb is a very arbitrary time, and I have no idea how late Friday night Rene has kept up, Saturday morning Rene. I don't want to be woken up by, an alarm, a notification coming through. But my iPhone knows when it starts moving again. So I can pick it up off the table, start walking around the house, and it can go, now he's awake, now he's moving, now I'll start downloading the newspaper, if he's going to want to read that, I'll start giving him the tweets that he missed overnight. It can be much more intelligent about our behavior and not based on some sort of artificial schedule, but based upon our actual usage. iBeacon starts giving us, again, a sort of a small-scale tracking system. It gives us indoor positioning. It can tell where we are, not just that we're in a building, but what room we're in. And then it can give us information about that room. It can give us guided notification. It can trigger our iPhone to tell us things about the building that we're in, whether it's how to find the next parking space, or the history of that statue, or the cost of that shirt and the belt that'll go nicely with that shirt and stop your coworkers from making fun of you as much. It can also do proximity notification. So as you get closer to things, it can tell how far away you are. So for example, you can get to a certain distance and it'll start playing a video. And you can get even closer and it can add audio because it knows, hey, you're actually interested in this and you're close enough to hear it. So it can start bringing the world around you, sort of make it alive. Now, there are some drawbacks to that. For example, it can be really annoying. You might not want to walk into a store that's like Minority Report and starts offering you lattes or latest discounts or stuff like that. The opposite of notification is disturbance, and the opposite of information is annoyance. And the good thing is that at least so far, Apple's making it really easy to turn that stuff off. It's just a single switch, iBeacons go dead, and you won't be bothered by them. So it's something that, again, if you choose, like location sharing, if you choose to enable it, you get benefits if you're willing to put up with the cost of those benefits. That brings us to Siri. Siri is a natural language interface. We used to have punch cards. We used to have command line. We have multi-touch now. We have, graphical user interfaces now. We have multi-touch now. Generally speaking, every big advancement in computing has been accompanied by a big advancement in user interface. They've made computers more accessible to more people more of the time. Natural language is different in that there wasn't really a natural language interface that's replacing the multi-touch interface or the GUI, but it's sitting alongside it, and it's allowing us to talk to devices and to talk to computers in a more human way. Instead of typing in commands or clicking mouse buttons or tapping on-screen buttons, you can just talk. You can hold down the home button and say, Siri, take me home. Or Siri, when is my baseball team playing next? Or Siri, find me Italian food tonight. So it will do all the hard work for you using that sequential inference that I mentioned earlier. There's some interesting places that could go. There's always listening. If you look at some of the Google devices, even some standalone navigation devices, they're always listening for your commands. You can say, okay, Google now, and then start talking, and you don't have to press a button. You could have your hands covered in flour. You could be across the room, and you can just take control of your phone. Now, that means the phone is listening to everything you say, because if it's not listening to everything you say, it won't know when you said, okay, Google now. So you have to be willing to put up with something that's always listening to you, and the privacy and security concerns that go along with it. Apple right now does not believe in that. They do not want any part of that. They want you to know that your stuff is your stuff and they're not listening to you. Other companies like Google and some other vendors, they're okay with that as long as you're okay with that. It's functionality we don't have now, but it's potential functionality in the future. Maybe even it would be a choice. You could say, hold down the button, say, Siri, listen to me for 5 minutes, and then for 5 minutes, it will actually take your voice commands and then automatically shut off. But it's a potential. You also have prescience, which Google now is doing as well, which means Siri right now will answer any question you have, but it won't try to predict the questions you haven't asked yet. Google now will try to do that. If it has access to your web history, your email, your travel plans, it will try and send that stuff up before you actually need it, because it thinks you're going to find it useful. Apple is experimenting with that a little bit in Notification Center in iOS. It'll tell you, it keeps track of your recent places, and it'll say, you typically leave for work at this time, there's traffic right now, you might want to leave earlier, but it's incredibly limited. And Apple has no interest currently to sort of crunch all the information about you that it would need to on the servers. It doesn't want your data on their servers. It doesn't want any part of the sort of the risk or the consequences of keeping personal data on servers. So it's something that they might eventually get into, but it's not something they're doing now. But it is a potential for this kind of voice-controlled technology. Eyesight went from being a camera to sort of being an eye. It's got better photography now because of all of the intelligence that's put into it, because of the image signal processor in the Apple A7 chipset and in previous generation chipsets. It can take okay glass. I mean, it's not Nokia glass. It's certainly not Canon DSLR glass. It can take high quality but very small glass, and it can pull every bit of information and process every pixel out of that to make it still one of the best cameras available on any mobile device. That's because they're putting all that intelligence into it, the facial recognition, the dynamic exposure, the new automatic HDR. It's making pictures that are better than is possible with just the camera. But the potential is also there for augmented reality, so you can start layering data over that. We've seen apps that do that for a while. You hold up your phone in front of a hotel and it tells you about the hotel, tells you the rooms that are available and the rates that are available. It uses the camera's live view as sort of a way to give you the context and make it real to you in a way that a static web page isn't. It also does product scanning. You can scan an iTunes card. You can scan a barcode in an Apple store through the eyesight camera, and it can detect what that thing is, and it can either add the credit to your account, or it can check you out with that item. And it's because it's smart enough now to understand those kinds of transactions. In the future, Apple bought PrimeSense. PrimeSense made the original Xbox Kinect controller. Could they be doing more face and motion recognition? That's the kind of thing that could make the camera even smarter, because it will not only see faces, but sort of keep track of how they're moving them in space. It could do things, Samsung's ill-fated look away, the video stops playing. Probably not the best use of that kind of technology, but there are probably some very good technologies that could be put together just based on the camera being able to understand movement in 3D space in front of it. And there's also always watching, which Microsoft's new Xbox One Kinect does, which is sort of like always listening, but it's a camera around you all the time. I put giant bits of tape over those kinds of things right now, because I don't want any part of them watching me all the time. But if you really don't care about what it sees, you can avail yourself of the ability to wave in front of it and turn it on, or have it recognize that it's you and not your daughter, or not your son or your significant other. And it starts to make it really intelligent, because like Touch ID, it not only knows that there's a face there, but it starts to recognize that it's your face there. And it starts to do that without you having to do anything to initiate it. And that brings us to Touch ID. So Touch ID, again, is the home button made smart. You can use it to authenticate access. So you can use it to unlock. It's not really a password. It's not super strong. It's not, 63 pseudo-random characters. It's more like a username. But if that's okay security for you, if it's more convenient than using a passcode or a strong password, and you're willing to go with that, you can now unlock your iPhone with just a touch of your finger, and it'll know it's you. It'll also know what finger it is, because you can have multiple fingers set up. You could, if you're, for example, going on a trip, if you're hiking, if you're mountain climbing, you can program a friend's or a guide's finger in there temporarily, so if anything happens to you, they can get into your phone and contact the people that you need to be contacted. And then you can just erase it again. So you don't have to share passwords, you don't have to share passcodes, but you can use biometrics, sort of an easy way to share access to devices. You can authorize purchases on iTunes. What can you do in the future? Maybe you can start expanding those transactions. Right now, there's no really good way to secure that yes or no token. So, apps could theoretically spoof it. So Apple doesn't make it accessible to other applications. Some other vendors like Samsung now has already made an SDK for it. It's possible that Apple will come up with a really good way to secure tokens in the future and let other apps hook into Touch ID, so you can buy or authenticate or access anything just using your fingerprint. It'll also maybe be possible to project that trust. So we have Bluetooth in our devices, we have Wi-Fi in our devices. Once we can prove to our phone or our tablet who we are, maybe a trusted Bluetooth connection could unlock things around us. As soon as I unlock my iPhone, maybe my Mac gets unlocked. Maybe my front door or my garage door gets unlocked. It becomes just a much easier way, a much more convenient way to get through things. But conversely, it can also be a more secure way. Because one day, right now, you turn on Touch ID and that's it. But one day, maybe it'll all be separate. You could choose Touch ID and a passcode. You could choose Touch ID and a passcode and a Bluetooth trusted object. And that way you have full, three-factor authentication. So you get a win for people who just want the convenience and a win for people who want really, really good security. That's all because the device starts to know who you are and other devices start to know what you have. That also brings us to CarPlay, which for the first time decouples interface from the device. For most of our lives in computing, the interface was bound to the device that ran it. The Aqua or Classic OS ran on the Mac. iOS ran on the iPhone. Apple is not one of those companies. They're not LG. They're not Samsung. They're not the kind of company that manufacture refrigerators and toilets and dishwashers and all these myriad of other things. And they're also not the company that licenses out their OSs to run on all these things. I remember I was at CES this year and there was an Android-powered dishwasher. And the poor the poor PR lady came up to us and she said, "This thing has been texting me all night. I want to hit it with a hammer." It was just totally out of, because it was another thing she had to learn, another device she had to take care of. With the projected interface, you don't have to do that. You have your iPhone. I bought my car the year before they got iPhone connectivity. I asked my dealer, there was nothing I can do to upgrade short of buying another car. That's their serious answer, buy the next year's car. With something like CarPlay, every time Apple updates the iPhone, and they've been doing that every year for the last few years, every time they update iOS, and they've been doing that every year for the last few years, I get a better experience because all it's doing is taking over the screen that's in my car. And it's also contextual because it understands that the car is not a tiny phone interface. It can provide a specific interface for the car. Maybe Apple TV will go that way soon too, because CarPlay is just bidirectional AirPlay. So maybe we'll have a discrete interface on our Apple TV, the same apps we love, the same games we love. It understands what sort of display it's on, and it makes itself fit that display. And that leads us to something very interesting. Maybe we could eventually have iOS everywhere. I would love iOS on my DSLR. I'd love to be able to have, connect to Instagram and send photos there, or 500 pixels, or just connect anyway. I'd love to be able to have an Apple experience on any display because I already understand it, I already know how to use it, and my device provides pretty contain all my data. It stops me having to learn and maintain and manage one extra thing. So we put that all together, and what do we get? Well, on the surface, people for years have been predicting artificial intelligence would lead to the Terminator, or the Matrix, or Whopper, or any one of 100 other nightmare scenarios where devices attain sort of intelligence enough to realize the world would be better if there were no humans on it. But that's not what we're getting. It turns out we're not getting artificially intelligent things. We're getting things that are just aware. We call them smart because it's an interesting sounding word, but they're not really that smart. They're aware. They understand their surroundings and they can give us that data. But at no point do they have any decision-making abilities. At no point do they have the ability to carry around plasma rifles or send agents after us. They are just highly convenient tools. So what we have is something more like Jarvis in the movie incarnation of Iron Man, where it's an assistant that sort of takes care of you in the best way possible. And it may be no coincidence that CarPlay's actual codename at Apple is Start, because that's the sort of tool that's being built here. It's something that, if we were to sort of imagine the not too distant future, I could maybe visit you in person and my phone will tell me, oh, the next available parking space is 3 rows down on the left. And then I get out of my car and it says, you want to make sure you go to room C7. I've tried to go to room C7 for my annual homeowners association meetings. I can never find it. I can find the group of bewildered people standing in front of it, but I can never find it. But this could actually take me to that room. On my way there, whether I'm wearing a wearable or I just have skin contact with the bezel on the phone, it could say, hey, you forgot to eat breakfast this morning, smart guy. Your blood sugar is really low. But there's a vending machine coming up on the left, and I could go up there, and my phone could authorize a purchase, and a candy bar or nutrition bar, depending on how you feel about junk food, could pop out of the machine, and I could eat it on my way to the meeting. I could get in there, and, maybe it's a business appointment, and I could put down my phone, and my phone will understand that there's a Thunderbolt display there, and it'll just take over that display the way it takes over CarPlay. There's a lot of talk about whether OS 10 or iOS will eventually become the same thing. To me, that's sort of not really the question. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, they'll probably be entirely different things. My phone will be way smart. My phone will be able to take control of big displays. I won't need to worry about whether I'm sitting at OS 10 or iOS. Whatever I'm sitting at will just understand that it's me and give me the capabilities of that device. So I'll sit down there, all my stuff will come up, my slides will come up, Whether it's a tablet or a 27-inch monitor, it'll just be mine. I'll be able to use it for the period of time that I'm there. I can conduct my meeting. Maybe it's running long. Maybe I talked far longer than I thought I would. It would say, hey, now you're not going to be able to make it back to your office in time, and you have this meeting. So I'm busy alerting everybody that you're going to be 10 minutes late. And, you can explain to the boss when you get there, but at least they'll know that you're there. And I can start walking again. I can start listening to my podcast again. It'll just show up on my car when I get in there. And then if I have iOS hooked into all my devices, because Apple's not going to make my fridge, but it might be valuable to Apple and their ecosystem to show people who do make fridges, except for Samsung and LG, that it's the best experience is to have iOS have a really good connection to those things. And it could say, you forgot dog food last night, you forgot dog food the night before. Unless you want to become the dog food, you should pull over at that supermarket and pick it up right now because it's the right time to get it. And I can go pick up that dog food or I can order it and have an Amazon drone deliver it to my house, or whatever is the best solution for me. But my phone will know that I have that need because I told it to it, it remembers it, and it knows where I am and what the time scale is. When the day is up, I can get back home. Maybe I haven't finished the podcast yet. Maybe John Syracuse is going into the third hour of his Iron Man podcast. It'll just transfer to whatever home stereo I have. If there's video, that'll come up on the screen in my living room as I walk by. If I go into the kitchen, the tablet that I have there will pick it up because it'll know that I'm in those rooms, and it'll know that whatever, Apple's not going to make a Nest thermostat, but whatever thermostat does work with iOS, maybe even Nest, will know that it can turn down the heat in the bedroom because I'm in the living room now, or it can turn down the heat in the living room because I'm in the kitchen now. And in all these ways that aren't really creepy, that aren't really life-threatening, that aren't, a Terminator crushing my skull with its foot, or a giant computer plugging me into a battery, it can provide all these services. And it's not as cool looking yet as 3D holograms in an Iron Man movie. It's not, it can't build me those kinds of suits yet, but it'll be able to do all of those things because it understands context, because it has all of these sensors, and because step by step, very, very slowly, we're getting that capability. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's slow. I think, yes, it takes the technology a long time to mature. We can do things now that we could never do before. But I had the good fortune of talking to companies like Ford at CES, and they'll tell you that they can do amazing things with cars right now that they don't do because they would just scare the heck out of all of us. So one year you'll get the automatic parking, and then one year you'll be able to say, hey car, come find me. It'll come out of the parking spot and drive up to you. And step by step they'll be able to make these things more intelligent, and if we're willing to share just as much as we're willing to share, they'll make them more helpful to us. And that's the kind of future that really excites me, and that's the kind of future for Apple that really excites me, because Apple isn't Facebook, they aren't Google, they're not companies whose profit is derived from using me as a product or collecting vast amounts of my information. And I'm not trying to judge them because that's an extremely good business, and for a lot of people, their data is worth much less to them than time or money. So they are more than willing to give companies as much data as they can to get free services and to get really good services, because to them that's a really, really good deal. But for people who tend to like Apple, they tend to like the fact that Apple just wants to sell us a shiny box. And that's the end of our transaction. With Google and Facebook, you kind of feel like you're getting a free lobster dinner, and then they're sort of leering at you across the table afterwards. Like that's not the end of the dinner, really. Apple's happy if you stick around. They'd love to have coffee and dessert with you if you're going to split the bill with them. They always go Dutch. But they don't require that of you. They don't have any follow-on intentions. You can buy your iPhone, buy your Mac, walk out of the store, and use it without Apple at all if you really, really want to, or at least with a very minimal amount of Apple. And I'm not adverse to all those other things, but I like the fact that a company like Apple is the one who's driving a lot of this technology, because I am more inclined to share data with them just because I don't feel like it's being sold or collected or used for anything beyond just giving me better experiences on my device. So that to me is the contextual awakening that sort of started a long time ago on the Mac, started more recently on the iPhone, but it's just building and building and building with more recent versions. And it's something I really hope we see expanded on with iOS 8 and then OS 10.10, the 310s, coming up hopefully at WWDC. because that's the kind of future I really want to live in. And that's it. That is the extent of my contextual awakening talk.
Well, Rene, I mean, your breadth of knowledge is incredible, and it's great because you're showing us what can happen in the future. The contextual awareness you're talking about, or awakening. We can always judge a speaker by how many people are still awake at the end of the speech here with our old demographics, and I can assure you that everyone is, and they really enjoyed it. Before we get to the questions, you brought up some things about the original iPhone, and when you think about that, it was so many of these sensors were built into the original iPhone, and that was 7 years ago, and they were finding it 3 years before that, and even just the proximity sensor, so it saves screen life and you don't hit the mute button. Just little things like that had never been done. And I mean, that to me gives me a lot of confidence that Apple will be able to do things going forward more than we can ever imagine. I mean, look what phones were before that. So.
Yeah, well, they worked 3 to 4 years ahead. Like when they gave us the original iPhone, they were working on the iPhone 4. When they gave us the original iPad, they were working on the iPad Air. So you can only imagine what they're working on in those labs right now.
Exactly. Now you mentioned CarPlay and that remote. How did you the ability for it to control the phone? I look at that as maybe the way for the wearable. You'll essentially have a CarPlay type interface on a wearable where you're just giving it that slight amount of feedback back and forth if the wearables come to be.
Apple's probably making a wearable, but Apple, like any company, is bound by the laws of economics and physics. For example, you're not going to have an LTE radio in your Apple band or watch because it would burn your wrist. And
the battery would last about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, those things are still constrained by they can't always deliver the product they want the first year. They try to deliver the best product they can, and then 2 years, 4 years, 6 years out, they start to get really close to the product they initially wanted, and then they can just go straight ahead from there.
But if it's similar to like the CarPlay interface with low-power Bluetooth, you don't really have to have that LTE radio in your wearable because it's connecting through your phone to everything. So.
Absolutely, and with multi-peer, even if you worry that Bluetooth 30 feet is not enough to keep you connected, if it can start jumping from device to device or access point to access point, then you start increasing the potential range of those connections.
So this could be very social. If you want to have better connections, you need to be around a bunch of people.
Absolutely.
Questions from the audience for Rene? Go ahead, Jerry. And I'll repeat it in case Rene can't hear it.
How do you manage the context, the issue between too much context and too much privacy? How much control are we going to have of those decisions?
Were you able to get that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was how much control do you have, and the price. I guess there's a balance between the features that they give you and the data you have to give up to get it. And right now, Apple is really, really good about that. If you go into OS 10 or iOS, if you go into preferences, you can turn off, just turn it off dead. You can turn off location. You can turn off recent locations. You can turn off Bluetooth. You can turn off iBeacon. You can turn off all of those features. By doing so, you won't get the benefits of those features. But if your privacy or your data, whether all the time or just some of the time, is more important to you, that's an easy decision to make. And for example, I'll sometimes go traveling and turn on things like Foursquare that I don't use at home because I'm out with friends and I want them to be able to find me. Or I'll turn on Find My Friends or something, which is usually never on because location I consider very private and I don't like sharing that. But in certain contexts, I don't mind. And I like the fact that you can share, for example, in Find My Friends, you can share just for an hour, just for 5 hours, just for a day. And they give you sort of that kind of control and those blanket on-off switches that you can always do if you think, you want to absolutely be certain that that thing is dead.
But those are things that you have to choose to do and know how to do. How do you make it Apple convenient?
What they do now is they ask you on setup. So if you're a brand new user, it'll put up a little prompt, and they can always inform. It's hard to tell how much they should inform you, but they do say, do you want to turn on location? Do you want to turn on Siri? Do you want to do you want to share your data back to us for traffic and bug fixing things? And you can go and turn those on and off as you do them. I do think there's a problem now that there's too many alerts. If you turn on a Twitter app, for example, it will say, can I share your location? Can I share your photos? Can I share your Twitter accounts? Can I share I think there's 2 or 3 other things, and that's overload. Most people will just say yes, 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 or no, 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 no. So I do think for a long time I thought maybe a sheet that comes up that has those handy toggles and you can quickly do it or relaunch at any time and adjust them, maybe because you learn more or maybe because you're in a specific situation. But I think there are things they can do to make that easier and more understandable for us.
There's always a trade-off between convenience on one side and security on the other, and Apple spells it out pretty well. And again, Apple isn't leveraging that information to make more money. They've made the money off you already, unlike Google and some of the others. I'm not saying Google is bad in that regard, but that's how their whole business model is set up. Any other questions? That was a great question, Jerry. Back in the back, and I'll probably have to repeat it.
Apple losing market share on the phones, maybe because of pricing. How do you think that's going to affect it in the future?
Were you able to pick that up?
Is Apple losing market share on phones?
He stated that they're losing market share, and it's because of the price on the phones and what can they address in the future.
So
put on your Phil Schiller hat, I guess.
That it's both new and it's old for Apple. You know, Apple lost market share to netbooks, and they really didn't care because there was no profit in netbooks, and it basically took the bottom out of the computing industry. Phones are subsidized, so the real price is hidden. It's like imagine you walked into Best Buy and every television set, regardless of size, was $200. It greatly distorts the market. People would buy the biggest TV they could, the best TV they could, because the price really didn't matter. For Apple, though, they tend to stick with premium because they don't want to be the most popular. I mean, they'll take it if they can get it, but their drive is not to sell the most phones. They say it's to make the best phones, but what really they're after is to make a product that makes customers happy enough that they will pay a premium price for it, that they will see value more than cost. A lot of people make decisions based on cost. For some people, price is the most important feature. Apple does not target those customers. They have historically and currently had no interest in them. They want people who find value in the user experience beyond the cost. So if they lose market share and it's in tablets because a lot of people in Asia are buying video players that just happen to run Android, they're fine with that. If they're losing market share, even in America or Indonesia, to very low-cost messenger phones, they're fine with that because they're increasing market share currently in the premium handset market. Apple has 0% share of the under $400 phone market, and they don't want any percentage share of that because of brutal business. They have, depending on who you listen to, 70 to 85% of the premium share, the share of premium phones. And that's why the iPhone continues to be so profitable. It's more profitable than Google, than Microsoft, and all of their businesses. It's probably one of the most profitable businesses we're ever going to see in the near future. So I think that makes them largely immune to any concerns over market share.
And you talk about market share as numbers, but when you talk about market share as profit, they blow everybody else out of the water on the phone.
They make almost all the money.
And again, I think we know that is changing because there's less and less of the subsidized phones happening out there. But you know, I have confidence that they go in the right direction. And you know, I mean, it's like they call it the Apple tax for the computers. But realistically, would we have anything else?
One of the problems with the way smartphones are measured now is that it's a very immature market. If you look at cars, they are segmented. No one says, oh, Cherry has a way bigger share of the market than BMW, because it's ludicrous. You know, Cherry is an incredibly inexpensive car sold in China. So if they sell more than BMW, no one in their right mind cares. And no one in their right mind should care if your phone that's $100 off contract sells more than the iPhone, because that's what that phone is designed to do. They've made a decision to go for that sort of economics. And they really should be segmented away, like under $400 phones, over $400 phones, what segment of phone they're in. Are they a premium phone? Are they a loss leader? And when you get to mature markets, like maybe, fingers crossed, phones will be one day, we probably won't have to put up those kind of headlines anymore.
And if it's a race to the bottom on price, someone's always going to be there to try to undercut you whether they lose money or not.
Well, look at the business. I mean, people dumped if anyone here remembers VHS, people dumped VHS. Where are those companies now? They are licensed brands that Walmart uses to make you think their no-name stuff actually has a name. People who dump netbooks, where's their business right now? I mean, they're successful to some degree, but they took an awful hurting by dumping products. So racing to the bottom is an incredibly different business and one that Apple's, again, historically shown no interest in.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Gail. This is our founder. She founded MacNexus in October of 1984, so we're coming up on our 30th anniversary. Gail?
And I wore this for you because it's.
Oh, here, come on.
Oh, yes.
Here, back up a little.
Hi, Gail.
Hi.
Was
So-
it Jay Adore?
Yes. What I wanted to know is, you talked about the Wemo, and is that secure now, or do you trust it? And what about things like that in the future? I bought one, and then I unplugged everything, and I worry about whether those are going to be secure.
Sorry, I missed the first word.
The Wemo, the Belkin Wemo, was that the Belkin Wemo?
Yeah.
Yes, the Wemo.
Oh, so I meant the Nintendo Wiimote.
Right, yeah.
As a sort of a magic wand controller. Security in general, though, for any attached device, I mean, some people have great reservations about Bluetooth as a secure technology. People have great reservations about NFC as a secure technology. Apple takes this stuff really seriously. Like, when you start looking into Touch ID, the amount of work that went into making that secure, the reason they didn't use a swipe fingerprint reader, like the sort of the standard that's been around for years and companies still use, is because they didn't think it was a good solution. And, like, for example, if you take a Touch ID sensor out of an iPhone to try to swap it with another one, it will never ever work again. If you put the original one back in, because you've disconnected them, it will never work again. That is a locked, sealed connection that only allows you to transfer data from the Touch ID sensor to the ACE7 chip that it was matched with at birth.
And that data is sequestered inside the phone in a specific spot that none of the apps can touch.
Absolutely. It's never in RAM, it's never in the higher processors, it's never accessible to any device. And I think that Apple will probably continue. Like you can never stop accident or error. So if someone writes bad code, like go to fail, you can't stop that. That'll happen. And social engineering, if someone tricks you into giving you a password or giving you their connection, or they take your thumb and force it onto the phone, you can never protect against that. But as much as is technologically possible, I think we'll get those kinds of secure connections, because Apple, if anyone had a chance to see the iOS security document, it's amazing the length they've gone to secure as much as they can, as well as they can. And I think they've shown traditionally that they value that highly.
And it will sense whether it's a live person or not. And I don't know if you read today, but there was a headline today, and I've got it on my list of headlines I'm going to read. The Samsung Touch ID was already cracked and PayPal's at risk.
Yeah. And Apple gets a lot of scrutiny, and sometimes we think that it's unfair, but it's also really, really good for Apple users, because if Al Franken is writing you a letter day one, you know that Apple's going to sweat the details, and that's the kind of Apple that we want.
And that's why it takes time. That's why they're never in a hurry to get this out, but when they get it out, they've got your best interest at heart. Any other questions?
They're an incredibly patient company.
Carol, first.
Medical uses with the iPhone.
Oh, medical uses with the iPhone, maybe like HealthBook, and then also the device, the wearables or the things that are coming on that regard.
Yeah, so health is sort of Apple's issue right now. A couple of years ago, they went full tilt into education with textbooks, and they had actually an event for education. This year, they're working heavily on health, and HealthBook is one of the ways. If it's ready in time for iOS 8, it's one of the ways that can do that. They've hired a lot of health experts. It's probably not feasible for them to roll out all of that technology themselves this year. Sort of like how the original iPhone didn't have 3G and the original iPad didn't have a camera, but year after year you go from those original products to the iPhone 5 or the iPad Air. We will get sort of level one, what they could do in a reasonable amount of time this year. So HealthBook is a nice way that it could sort of collect together any health information you have from existing peripherals or accessories. So Apple won't have to do that all the way. There's already connected blood pressure readers, all sorts of connected health devices. So Apple can collect that. And over time, as those technologies mature and get miniaturized and get integrated, they can sort of pull more and more of that into their own products. So whether an iPhone 6 or an iWatch 1 will be able to do all that monitoring itself, it's hard to say. It'll do as much of it as Apple can put into it at a reasonable price point. But what I always like is not like HealthBook, I like HealthKit. The same way Passbook is okay, but PassKit, which is the framework underneath it, is really intelligent because it's highly expandable in the future. I think HealthKit will be the same thing. We'll get the first iteration and it'll be highly dependent upon other people and it'll do only a limited number of things, but pretty well. But the technology underneath it will let Apple sort of slot in better and better versions as we go forward.
And most of the support devices will not be made by Apple. They'll be made by these medical people, and Apple will allow the interface, and that's what this motion processor in there does too. It can monitor these things. It can alert you to blood glucose levels if it goes low, or if you're walking to the homeowners meeting and you need a candy bar, things like that. So Apple provides the pathway and kind of coalesces all that and alerts you to it, because Apple doesn't want to get into that, because there's some tricky things that can happen there, and why be in that business? Apple likes to do what they do best. We had a question in front here.
Why can't it be a better low signal phone?
You have AT&T, I assume. Oh, you mean why can't it have better reception?
If there's a low signal situation, why can't it deal with that better?
So at the end of the day, you always have to make a choice, and the choice they make is not going to appeal to everybody. So right now, Apple's choice is to keep you connected, and no matter what, to try to keep you connected no matter what. So as the signal gets lower and lower, the iPhone radios will power higher and higher, which is why the iPhone gets hot, which is why it starts to lose battery, because it's desperately trying to make whatever connection it can. Now there are other choices that could be made. For example, they could say when a signal gets below a certain level, turn off the radio, or give the user the choice, or go into power saving mode. But then people might not get messages that are really important, or they might not get notifications they really need. And that's a choice maybe some other companies will make, but it's not what Apple considers to be the most important thing right now. There are also, for example, some companies put multiple radios in, so you can do simultaneous voice and data on CDMA networks like Verizon or Sprint, because they haven't updated to voice over LTE yet, and their old EVDO Rev-A networks can't support that technology. So Apple chose not to do that because they think that that's an excessive drain on battery life and not something that would be as meaningful to all of their customers. And it drives people on Verizon and Sprint mad, because some Android devices do that, and they have ginormous batteries to make it efficient to do that. So again, it comes down to Apple making a choice that they think is the best for most people most of the time. But for those of us, like when I'm roaming in Las Vegas or San Francisco with a million other iPhone users, and my phone is draining in front of my eyes, I wish I had another option. But that's the choice they've currently made.
And a lot of it has to do with the antenna size. And you could do Michael Douglas at Wall Street and have a huge antenna there, and you get great reception. But again, it's a trade-off on that. And I really think it lends itself to the carriers are improving that, and especially the LTE, because I have times when I can't make a call, but I can do data, and my data comes over LTE. So I think it's not unique to Apple, but it's also a lot of that revolves on the carrier themselves.
And that's a good point too, because LTE, faster is better for a number of ways. And sometimes people think if you turn off LTE, it's better, but actually LTE is really good, because what you always want with a small mobile device is race to sleep. The faster you can move data and shut off a radio, the longer the battery will last. So LTE does things so much faster than 3G that you can do more and shut down faster. That actually saves you, like 802.11n and eventually 802.11ac will be the same thing. You can just shut off Wi-Fi faster. So yeah, Apple wants really thin phones. They want to put their antennas in crazy places, and that has a cost. But hopefully, as LTE becomes more prominent, and voice over LTE especially, they'll be able to drop all those old voice channels. Everything will be a packet, and it'll just free up a lot more data for all of us.
Yeah, you'll be using your data very much like a VoIP call over your phone, and that's likely to be more robust than what you currently have on your voice channels.
When?
Apple's very slow, remember? He asked when.
Conservative. Yeah, Apple's conservative with radio technologies. Like, again, they didn't have 3G on the original iPhone. They didn't have LTE till the iPhone 5. They want really mature chipsets because they really care about thin devices and long battery life, which are usually mutually exclusive things. So they bargain away sort of cutting-edge radio technology as part of the deal to get there.
The other thing that's huge you got to remember is Apple walks slowly to get where they are, because when they introduce a new iPhone, they have 10 million of them available the first weekend. And you don't want to have a mistake. So, Al, you had a question back there? Just stretch it. Anybody else? Great. Rene, we got a couple extra minutes. We got like 5 minutes till we do our break. But, I see you on all these podcasts, and I go, your breadth of knowledge is incredible. What's your background?
My background is actually highly varied. My father was an IBM engineer when I was growing up. We always had computers around the house. But my mother was an artist, and I actually got into graphic design first. So I worked as a graphic designer and a book designer and a page layout guy for a long time. Then I started doing icons and interface design and enterprise. And then eventually I went into marketing, and I did product marketing for many years. And after a while, it was in enterprise, and I love enterprise, but it's not the most exciting technology. I was in databases specifically, and it's fascinating stuff, but mobile is sort of where all the amazing stuff is happening. So when I had the chance, I sort of switched sides and went into media, and that sort of let me cover all this kind of technology, which I think it's the most radical change we've had in a long time.
Oh yeah, it's an incredible time, and again, the iPhone can do more than most of our computers can do, and you really have to realize that. You're up in Canada, and it gets pretty cold there, and I noticed you have over your right shoulder a cheese grater Mac there, and that actually works as a pretty good room heater at many times, I can imagine.
It's actually supposed to snow again tomorrow, so I'm gonna maybe start rendering some videos so I stay close to your work.
Yeah. Great. Renee, again, one last question, go ahead.
Is there going to be a big advantage moving forward from the A7 to the A8 chip? The iPad and so forth?
Did you hear that? The question was, is there going to be a big advantage over the A8 over the A7? And, there always is a bit, but who knows what's in it, right?
Yeah, so the A7 is so far ahead. I mean, we all saw the reaction of Qualcomm and other chip makers. I mean, Samsung makes Apple's chips, and they couldn't get to where the A7 was. They weren't anywhere near it. The A7, I think I was talking to Brian from Nantech, and I was asking him, is the iPhone 5S overpowered or is the iPad Air underpowered? And he said, dude, they are both way overpowered. You could run a netbook off of that chip. So where they go with the A8 is my best guess, and someone like a Nantech is way better positioned to answer this, but my best guess is going to be a next generation A7, because we've already got 64-bit, we've already got the OpenGL ES3, whether Apple starts introducing their own radio chips, which they don't do currently, their own graphics chips, which they don't do currently, the CPU looks really mature. They can make a better version of it. It'll be a better version of the existing 64-bit Cyclone chip. But they still use Imagination graphics chips. I think they're still using Broadcom radio chips. Maybe there's some Qualcomm in there too. So there's a lot of things they can do to actually make that system on a chip more of an Apple system.
Yeah, and the other thing you've seen is when the 5S came out, they put supplemental chips in there to help offload some of that. Like we've always had GPUs for graphics. They have the motion sensor, so they can get more specific with that. And when you think about it, I mean, that phone's thin and small, and it's amazing. So.
Yeah, and Google in the Motorola X, they have a context awareness and a natural language coprocessor. And one thing I'd really love to see is for Siri to be on board so that it can do, for example, right now if I want to change my calendar, even though it's on the device, it's got to go to nuanced servers on Apple Data Center and come back to my phone. So the network becomes a point of failure. But if they can start doing that on board the way Google now does, I think it would just make the experience that much better for all of us.
And if you ever have somebody that has an Android phone, just walk by and say, "Okay, Google now," and you can talk to their phone and you can do all the different things you want and mess with them. It's okay. Renee, thanks very much, you guys. I can't thank you enough. You were fantastic as always. So thanks again, Renee. And are you having a little bit of springtime yet?
We had a couple of days, but like I said, it's supposed to snow again tomorrow, so I believe it's like that Game of Thrones thing, but winter is just always here.
Well, we always try to time it where you're going to be in California near our meeting, but it never works out because Macworld was just a bit ago and stuff. But we'll keep going because it's always nice here in Sacramento. So
absolutely.
Thanks again, Renee. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Bye now. All right, well, time for our break. Jim? Yeah, let's wait for the tech Q&A and stuff after that, or if you have consumer seller here, go see Jim. We'll do the break. I'm going to stop the recording, but then also remind me at the next part part to start the recording again. So about 10 minutes or so. Again, see Jim, if you had consumer cellular